How y'all doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I actually called in because there's something I've been dealing with for a few years now, and I wanted to basically get some advice on it.
Yeah, of course. What do you got on your mind?
Well, I know the call screener probably told you that I'm having difficulty dealing with my bisexuality, which is basically a big thing with me right now. A little background on myself first. I'm happily married to my wife of almost 5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're pretty soon going to have 2 kids together, and I love her to death. But one thing that I'm finding myself struggling with these past couple of years is even though I love getting intimate with her and having sex with her, you know, to be blunt, I guess, is I also find myself in a way craving men and not just women.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I don't know if that's actually putting a roadblock in anything. I mean, I've talked to my wife about it before, and, you know, she doesn't necessarily like it, but she is supportive of me. I was just wanting to see what y'all's, what kind of advice y'all could give for me.
Well, I think first off, to know kind of what direction we're headed in here, we are a very sex and relationship positive show. So are you looking for remaining monogamous with your wife, or are you looking for maybe expanding that relationship out?
Could you tell me what those 2 words mean, please? Because I'm not familiar with those terms.
Sure. Monogamous would be just you engaging in sexual activity with your wife only. And then opening your marriage up would be maybe an open marriage or a polyamorous relationship, which would be one or both of you or your wife stepping outside of what you would call your marriage to enjoy sexual pleasure with other people.
With consent, with everyone.
Yes,
yeah,
of course.
And
with
there
consent.
are a number of things in between. I think it's important to point out that everybody's marriage is
Unique.
It not only is it unique, but it's a certain percentage monogamous, right? Everybody, no matter how closed or quote unquote traditional, how exclusive their relationship is, everybody has some level of, okay, it's all right to notice people outside of the marriage, or it's okay to watch pornography of people outside of the marriage, or maybe it's even okay to kiss, or, you know, so there are gradients to these things. So I think the question is, how monogamous is your marriage, and is that something you're looking to change?
Well, I'd say as far as that goes, you know, I've talked to her about it in the past couple of months or so, and basically we basically got to talking about, you know, me possibly finding somebody outside of our relationship to give me what I'm seeking, but we haven't quite made a decision yet. And, you know, in the past, you know, I've actually had sex toys that I use to actually give me that. But one problem that I've had that I've been struggling with the past year or so is I'm not really sure how to put it, but I guess you could say it's kind of like I'm kind of wanting the real thing, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sex toys are great and self-pleasure is wonderful, but if that's not what you're looking for, then it may just be a stopgap. You know, so that's more than reasonable. And bisexual monogamy is a complicated and sometimes very difficult thing, because you are, you know, missing out, if you want to frame it that way, from a very real aspect of your sexuality.
And I think it's wonderful that hearing that your wife is supportive and somebody that you can talk to about this. Big props to her. How does that feel to have her being supportive and open about this with you?
Well, I've known, I'd say probably since around, I want to say somewhere around like my mid-high school years, I've known that I've basically discovered that I was bisexual.
Nice.
So let's say I graduated back in 2012, so I've been like that now for how many years would that be now?
6.
So
7.
Probably around 7 years I've known. And I think coming into this, she already knew about how I was, but, you know, just due to the relationship connection that me and her sparked up over the years, I mean, like I said before, she didn't necessarily like the idea, but because, you know, we had a connection and we love each other, she was supportive of that.
She wants you to be happy. She cares about you, and she sees that this is something that is a part of you and part of who you are, and there's nothing wrong, bad, or shameful about that. She sounds like a great support.
Yeah,
she really is, and honestly, that's one of the reasons why I've stayed with her all this time, is because of how great of a partner she is. And one thing that we've been talking about lately, which is one of the reasons why I called into the show to see what kind of advice y'all could give me on it, was we've talked lately, again, like I said, about me finding somebody outside our marriage that could give me what it is I'm looking for. But another thing that I struggle with is I've never really liked the idea of stepping outside my marriage, and that's I guess what Christy was talking about a stopgap. That would be one of the roadblocks that I've faced in recent memory. Is I know what I want to seek, but the problem is, you know, I was raised with the knowledge that when you're married to somebody, you should only be involved with that person and only that person. And if you step outside of that marriage, then you're not only being unfaithful to that person, but you're also cheating on them and hurting them. And that's always been a stopgap for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the standard narrative. That's kind of what so many of us in our culture are raised to believe. And the good news is you get to choose whether or not that's the type of marriage you want to have. There's not a prescribed definition of what marriage is. And I know that when we talk about, you know, legally defining marriage and all of these different types of constraints, that there are some definitions. But really, you and your wife, you and your partner, you and some hypothetical third or fourth or 20th person really get to decide for yourselves and for each other what the future holds. One thing I just want to mention before we get too much further down the road is that as difficult as this moment might feel, and how difficult it is to consider changing the nature of your relationship and exploring these sides of yourselves and all of that, that you are also being cognizant of the fact that if you do bring a third person into this situation, that person is also in a very vulnerable place. And, you know, as you talk about what you're looking for and going out and finding somebody that can help meet that need, I just want to kind of put a bug in your ear and just sort of remind you to be very cognizant of that person's needs and their experience as well. I don't mean to derail what we were talking about, but I think it's really important that people begin to think more and more about the experience of, you know, the third or the outsider or what have you.
Communication is really important.
I completely understand that. I mean, you don't want to bring a third person into the fold and, you know, lead them down a path that they might misunderstand and make it to where they think they're getting this, but really they're not.
Absolutely.
Right.
So that communication, as Melissa said, is vital.
And I think it's also important to remember that the idea of being unfaithful and the idea of cheating, it only really applies if you have not already agreed and consented with your partner, or I should say all partners, beforehand.
That's one thing that I got to thinking about when me and my wife were talking about that, and I told her that I don't think it would be cheating if me and her had both came to an agreement beforehand that this is what we were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're correct.
Yes, very, very correct.
And so long as that agreement is made without coercion, you know.
Both sides are on the same page.
But yeah, if you both agree to it, then, and you know, without any pressure, and you're both comfortable with that agreement, then absolutely, you're right, 100%. That's not cheating as we, you know, really mean to define it.
All right. Well, I have another question, if y'all don't mind.
Sure.
If say for example, if you were to bring a third person into the relationship to give you something that you're desiring, is it necessary to like create boundaries? Like, okay, you can get what you're looking for, but I don't want you doing this. For an example, is it important to set boundaries?
Very, very important. And it's very important to set those boundaries before you even get anything started. To have that social contract and that understanding before anything happens. That way there is no miscommunication, there's no misunderstanding, and everyone is on the same page. That is vital.
For what it's worth, I think that's true of anybody.
Yes.
If you are single right now, looking to date one person or 17 people, going into every relationship with the understanding that there is not a prescribed first date, second date, third date. You know, it's all a constant negotiation. Whether you've been in a marriage for 40 years or you're talking up somebody at a bar, that type of dialogue, I think, is vital and something that is really missing from our culture.
All right. So, for example, when me and my wife got to talking about what we were talking about, I was explaining to her, I said, well, if we're going to do this, I think it's very important that we have this conversation and we talk about what boundaries need to be set. That way we know ahead of time so that we're not having disagreement about it. And one thing that we did, I know I've watched the show before, and I know I heard before on the show you talking about weighing the pros and the cons of it and writing it down on a piece of paper if need be. I remember hearing that a couple of days ago when I was watching it on the show, and I've been binge watching on YouTube, by the way, so yeah.
Hey, we appreciate you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I love the show, by the way, guys. Y'all do a great job. But anyway, one thing that we did was I told her, I said, well, write down in a notebook the stuff that you would be okay with me doing and the stuff that you wouldn't want me doing. And I know among the some of the things she wouldn't want me doing is she said, you know, it's okay if you kiss this person, but not like intimately, like on the lips or anything, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like boundaries like that, or would you consider boundaries like that, like what you're actually agreeing to do within that situation? Would that be important, or like just boundaries in terms of, okay, how far can you take the situation, like the relationship?
I think if it matters to her and she matters to you, then it's...
Which she does.
Then it's all important and all a discussion and boundaries that you need to set, mutually agreed upon boundaries. So if that is a boundary that she wants to have and that's a boundary that you agree to, then that's part of your social contract.
And being prepared to check in with each other along the way and everyone involved is super important, because you may set those kind of contract or those boundaries at one point, and then as you progress through, you know, as you're checking in, someone may be feeling uncomfortable or like this doesn't feel so okay anymore. So being open to the fact that contract can be renegotiated and talked through.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I would add on to that is whatever y'all negotiate is great and fine and wonderful. If it's, you know, only on Wednesdays or never on a full moon or whatever you come to and agree on is totally okay. You have the right and the opportunity to negotiate with each other. I would also say that if you are getting the sense from a lot of these boundaries or rules or restrictions that maybe your wife is feeling really hesitant about, you know, opening things up or about changing the nature of your agreement, then be cognizant of that. If she is putting a bunch of really strange rules in there, then that may be a sign that the things that she's agreeing to, she isn't really agreeing to, or maybe she wants to agree to, but is feeling really challenged. Yeah. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable and to push your boundaries, but just make sure that there's not a lot of pressure and that everybody is working together and being open and honest, not just communicating, but communicating in an honest way.
So let me see if I'm understanding this correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm understanding that you're saying is like, okay, if we start talking about, okay, these are what the boundaries are. If she starts setting certain boundaries that, you know, would throw up a red flag, like just be cognizant and aware of how comfortable she is with the situation and, you know, be respectful of that.
Yeah, checking in constantly and being as compassionate as possible. Honestly, anytime a existing relationship dramatically changes the agreements that it's based on, which is kind of what we're talking about here, there's likely to be some growing pains, and that's okay. Especially when you're doing something that our culture really looks down on and doesn't understand, there's going to be some pain. Just to warn you going in, I don't know anybody who's opened up an existing relationship that hasn't felt moments of doubt, moments of judgment, jealousy, and pain. So I want you to go in with your eyes open. But I also know plenty of people, tons and tons of people, that are so glad that they did it. So be aware of that pain, use it as an indicator, but also be brave.
So in terms of like what I've described my situation to be, where I love getting intimate with her, and but I also find myself wanting to have relations with a man as well. Would that be something that if my wife is on board with, would that be something that y'all would recommend me looking into if that's something I'm craving?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are tons of different ways of exploring that and levels. You know, maybe it isn't immediately jumping on Grindr or going out to a gay bar. Maybe it starts with pornography. Maybe it starts with, you know, a lot of different ways. Know that you have options and that it's smart to dip your toe in, you know, before you rush into it, and to just take things slow, because so often once we get that starter pistol and we have permission, our eyes get, you know, bigger than our stomachs, and we end up in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I know how that is.
But anyway, I didn't mean to step on you, Megan.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like we say sometimes, if it's safe and it's consensual, then have fun. And it sounds like you are getting to the place with your wife where it would be, I mean, stay safe, please, and use protection and practice safe sex. But the consent part, it sounds like you and your wife are both together coming to the consent part of the agreement. And if you both are consenting and agreeing to this dynamic changing, there's really no reason for it not to.
All right. Well, I have one more question. This isn't a question about my sexuality. It was this is more pertaining to a conversation I had with somebody a while back, and I just wanted to get y'all's take on it. And by the way, I do appreciate y'all's input on this. That y'all have been a real big help.
Glad to hear it.
The other thing I wanted to ask about, because this is something that stumped me. I was at work one day, and I was talking to this guy that I was working with, and we got on the topic of religion, and we eventually got onto the topic of LGBT, homosexuality, whatever it is you want to label it as. And one thing he told me that I couldn't really come up with an answer for was he said homosexuality is not natural, because if it was, then women wouldn't be the only ones that could have babies. And I'd like to hear what y'all's thoughts are on that, because when he said that, I mean, I was stumped, honestly.
Yeah, I mean,
Christy.
Sunglasses aren't natural because the sun exists and it feeds plants, and, you know, water parks are unnatural because water is supposed to be on the ground or in the skies. Or, you know, you can make whatever justification you want. I mean, we can go into detail about all of the different species of animals that practice homosexuality. We can talk about how...
Which is a majority, by the way.
Yeah, and we can talk about how sex in primates and non-human primates is not just about reproduction. It's about socialization. It's about all kinds of different things. So there are about 10 million reasons why that's a pretty ridiculous argument, but I understand it's one that a lot of people hold on to.
It's common.
Well, when I was in the conversation with him, I found that whenever I get on this topic with somebody about it, whether or not it's natural, I oftentimes find myself thinking about the only example I can normally think of, which is a dog. And I brought it to him. I said, well, you are aware that dogs also exhibit this type of behavior. And he said, yeah, they hump. They don't actually have intercourse.
Oh, okay. Well, that's such a meaningful distinction when you've taken a species and inbred it and castrated it and groomed it in all of these different ways. Sure. Plenty of animals practice anal intercourse or different forms of what we would call a homosexual expression. I would say to your friend, read a book, man, because...
Just a book.
Yeah.
Go to the Museum of Sex. That has a great exhibit on animals.
I've been trying to do some research on that very thing within the past couple of months. Would y'all
very difficult thing to Google, by the way. Gay animal sex will bring up so many search results, but so few of them are what you're wanting.
Do y'all have any recommendations of something I could look up to actually research this further to come up with some answers?
One thing that just comes to mind is we're actually going to be interviewing Dr. Hector Garcia here on the show. His book, Alpha God, covers this in some detail. So that might be one place to look.
I was actually watching Talk Heathen.
Yeah, he was on a couple of weeks ago, and he's going to be joining us here pretty soon. So yeah, that might be one place that just comes to the top of my mind. What about y'all?
A book, just any science or biology or evolutionary textbook worth its salt is going to run through certain variations in species that cover this.
Yeah, Sex at Dawn, another book about evolutionary psychology and primatology, goes into even more detail than Hector's book does. So that's another one I might throw out there.
All right. Well, I think I'm gonna let y'all go, and I do appreciate all the advice and help y'all have given me, and y'all got a great show. Y'all keep doing what you're doing, man. I really appreciate y'all.
Hey, thank you so much for calling, and good luck.
Thank y'all so much.
Well, that, I think, was interesting.
So awesome.
But also, yes, very, very awesome.
I just think that, Kevin reaching out for information, for answers, for support, it sounds like they have a good dialogue about this and are really looking to explore. So it sounds like before he's taking any action, he's wanting to get information and make sure that he's approaching it in a way that is, respectful of what they're trying to do and it's consensual and everything. So I think I just strengths-based. I think that's one.
Yeah, no, I had the same thought that. I mean, this kind of situation exists for so many people, and the solution to that problem is usually cheating, sneaking around, lying about it, and yeah, anybody who is approaching it not just from wanting to communicate, but wanting to communicate with a knowledge base and an understanding is pretty remarkable. So I would definitely tip my hat to Kevin and kind of the journey he's on.
And for having the courage to actually, talk to his wife about it and discuss the options and not just stay in the closet, as it were, of, either denial or even worse, like Christy was saying, actually cheating and actually sneaking around without communicating with anyone.
Yeah.
So.
the shame that a lot of people carry with them over not talking openly about these things. I just loved hearing just the ease and comfort by which Kevin was able to talk about these things, and again with resources that he trusted. So Kevin, you're awesome.
Thank you. So with that, let's go ahead and get back to your group. Now, you say you teach sex ed yourself. What would be one of the more common questions that you get that, you know, maybe some people in our audience might be wondering, that is a commonly occurring question that some people may feel embarrassed by asking because they either think they shouldn't be asking the question, or they think, oh, I'm going to sound stupid for not knowing this. Yeah.
There's such a sense sometimes that, like, oh, I can't believe, like, this is a third grader question. I can't believe I don't know the answer to it. And then we get even further and further and further down the road without feeling comfortable acknowledging that. When, you know, as you said, so much of us were brought up in the sex ed system that exists that is so full of holes.
Well, and not only in the sex ed system, but also in the religious culture that is just pervasive. Yeah. Which sets up really bad ideals and norms.
Yeah. As I mentioned, I teach young people and adults in settings. And so one thing that comes up a lot with young people, and I would say it can come up with adults as well, but it may just sound or be framed a little differently, is around masturbation. Young people will often ask, is masturbation okay? And I think there are lots of adults, and especially folks that have vulvas who, you know, our society has just sent so many mixed and harmful messaging about access to their own bodies and their own pleasure, that sometimes it's just, you know, what does an orgasm feel like? Because these are not experiences that everyone is having because of those the repressed way in which a lot of people are growing up and the messages that they're getting around their ability to be able to experience self-pleasure. So that's one of the common themes, is around masturbation and pleasuring oneself and kind of getting to know your body and enjoying that, which is something that, you know, when we can get to know our bodies, you know, really intimately and understand them and trust them and understand what feels good, what does not feel good, then we have the better chance of being able to communicate that. If we move towards partnered sex, then we can then have those conversations with someone else and advocate for those things. So masturbation is definitely something that, you know, I believe is a helpful tool for those that, you know, feel like they want to explore that. And often that desire to explore it can be inhibited by early messages around, you know, don't do that, don't touch that, you know.
That's wrong, that's a sin, you shouldn't play with that part of your body.
Yeah, I mean, I was very much told that excessive masturbation could cause blindness, that it could eventually cause schizophrenia.
Hairy palms.
Yeah, and that's just madness when I think about it now. But I didn't even attest
It's not true, y'all. Look.
Yeah. Visual proof.
Right? We survived hairy palms.
Yes, and we're not blind either.
Nope.
And trust me, I've given it a whirl. So
a time or two.
Today. So